The only thing disappointing about this event is there are far too many men, both here on the dais and off the dais. I think women are far more competent, far more interesting, and therefore men must be rare, very few and far between. Only if it's absolutely necessary, invite men, because otherwise they only create problems. They're not part of the solution. We all know this gentleman here who is violently disagreeing, because after centuries of domination, it's very difficult to acknowledge that men are the inferior gender. We all know, if we are truthful to ourselves, that women oftentimes are better than men in most spheres of human endeavor. For myself, I can assure you, in my family, between my parents, my mother is by far the much more intelligent person. I've said it umpteen times publicly in the presence of my father. In my generation, there's often a fight between my wife and I. When we both played chess, in the early years after marriage, I found that oftentimes she was beating me. And therefore, in order to preserve domestic harmony, we decided to give up chess playing. In my children's generation, and this is true, I'm sure, in most families, most of us are blessed with a boy and a girl typically, sometimes two boys, sometimes two girls too. But where there are boys and girls together, we often see, in 90 out of 100 cases, the girl is invariably better than the boy. In my own family, that's true. We have both a boy and a girl. The girl is infinitely better. In services, Jayesh is still in service. If you make a fair comparison, let's say among couples in services, I have observed them very carefully, many of them, where the wife and husband both are in service. In 90 out of 100 cases, the lady is far superior. There are a few cases, I wouldn't like to name them, but there are a few cases where the male officer is better, and I'm not exaggerating at all. And yet, it has taken so many decades after independence for women to come into their own, because in a tradition-bound society, the gender domination and the power-centric nature of society, they mean that women are not given the opportunity to fulfill their potential. In a fundamental sense, the purpose of women in business, of FAPCCI or any other organization, is how do we enable these traditionally disadvantaged groups who are naturally well endowed in terms of intelligence, organizational capability, thrift, hard work, leadership, and the capacity to harmonize and reconcile conflicting interests. These are all the unique traits of women in our society. How do you make sure that their potential is fulfilled? It's a challenge anywhere in the world, in any sector, but in a country like India, it's particularly challenging because we have two special problems as a society. One, we have undoubtedly male domination in society, from a family to the nation. It's a fact of life. If we pretend otherwise, we are simply hoodwinking ourselves. Two, we are a power-centered society. Despite all our talk of Bhagavad Gita, spiritualism, and so on and so forth, no country do you see such vicious power play, such desperation to dominate, to be recognized, without really adding any luster to that position. And when power is so important, when traditional attitudes about gender and social groups, they continue to be dominant, there's always a problem to allow these disadvantaged groups like women to fulfill their potential. And therefore, in general, we all know that in building a business in this country, there are formidable obstacles. Every male member here, from the Venerable Mr. Tibriwala to Mr. Surana to everybody, they'll all come up with their stories of how hard they had to work for a lifetime to transcend these difficulties in a hostile country, because typically India has been very hostile to business over the past 67 years. Men or women, doesn't matter. When it's already hostile, the women have very special disadvantage, because the backslapping required, the bribe paying required, the influence peddling and the sifarish required, the the access to power that is required, all these simply are not available to women. They are much more difficult for women to access. And that's the context in which I wanted to make a few points. You take our two states of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. I'm sure Jayesh will come up with some fabulous things that the Telangana government is doing, and today's newspapers carried some of these things. We're happy about that. But there is a fundamental crisis. We have a phenomenal power shortage. I asked Anil just now, how are things in and around Hyderabad city? He said, sir, most industries are closing down, or they have closed down, small and medium enterprises. There's no power. And nobody is really showing serious interest. There's a problem. That is a fact of life. The horse has already bolted. How do we now recapture the momentum? And without bringing power back to the state, for industry at least, there's a larger problem of power sector in Telangana state, but we have to make sure that the golden goose is not killed. Because Jayesh is here, I'm appealing to him to convey to those that matter. All our talk about industrial incentives from rooftops will not make a difference unless the basic infrastructure, the willing and paying consumer in 2014 is denied power, then you can forget industrialization. We are not in the 18th century where digging pits and filling pits constitutes any kind of economic activity. We are hopefully in the modern era, at least 20th century industry, if not 21st century. To have that, we require the basic ingredient of modernity, and that is electrical power. Telangana state is losing annually about 6,000 crores or thereabout. Exact numbers are not known because they haven't done an annual study after the state is partitioned. We only have partial numbers. But about 6,000 crores is a reasonable number. 6,000 to 7,000 crores annual deficit in the power sector. That means either the state is compelled to parcel out this much of money from the exchequer to subsidize these losses on account of government policies and government failure, or these losses are uncovered and therefore they are mounting. Therefore, the distribution companies are no longer viable. If I'm not mistaken, even after covering the last year's losses, about 14,000 crores, last year the United AP government has given to the utilities, allowed them to float bonds and so on and so forth. Even after that, I think the utilities in Telangana state now have about a cumulative loss of more than 10,000 crores. And it's continuing every year with an addition of 6,000 to 7,000 crores per annum. On top of it, the state is now planning to go in for 6,000 megawatts worth of utterly irrational, high cost, unaffordable, uneconomical, unviable lift irrigation schemes. Now, that's larger politics. Let's not go into that. The very least they can do, the very least that all of us must fight for, the very least that people like Jayesh must insist on in government is create a separate grid for the city and industries in Telangana state. Don't kill the golden goose. Already there is a flight of capital. There's no new capital willing to come. Such as that is willing to come, if you don't at least guarantee power supply uninterrupted for economic activity, why should anybody invest money? People invest money not out of love for a land, a piece of real estate. They invest money because they want to do something worthwhile in terms of productive activity for society, and they want to have a decent life and dignity. Now, if neither of these is possible, it makes no sense to invest money. This is something that we cannot gloss over. Let us not pretend that there is no problem. If you take the state of Andhra Pradesh, the real estate mania that is generated is pricing land out of the market. Land is a key input for any manufacturing unit. And if you price lands at crores of rupees per acre and then expect a small entrepreneur or a medium entrepreneur to establish an industry, you're talking through a hat. It's rubbish. It's absolutely unaffordable, uneconomical. And in both states, the enormous prejudice that is being fueled by the politicians in power and out of power, either regional based, Andhra, Telangana, or caste based, whatever, it is simply ensuring that the best entrepreneurs don't want to look at these two states, because anybody with dignity, with self-respect, with genuine economic intentions to create value and create employment will not be swayed by either caste or regional considerations. The wealth creator does not understand caste, region, religion, language. The wealth creator only knows how to bring value. And if we are so stupid for our vote bank politics in dividing society and in somehow creating an atmosphere of hatred and prejudice and excessive bias, then both the states will pay a heavy price.